Everyone. Ron Gerber, head of Angelby. I'm so glad to be here with Ian Stewart, who is the Director of Sustainability for Sempra. Now, many of you may know of Sempra's operating entities. If you live in Southern California, I'm sure you know Southern California Gas, you know San Diego Gas and Electric. Sempra is the holding company overseeing a vast array of energy operating units, utilities, etc. So Ian has a very unique and very insightful perspective on the world of sustainability in terms of his role as one of the key executives in a major corporation, and especially a corporation that is directly involved in the energy industry. So what I thought I'd do is just turn it over to Ian now, where he can give a more in-depth overview of Sempra itself, describe all of its operating units, and then share with us why sustainability is so important on a corporate level to Sempra, again, one of the world's preeminent corporations, one of the world's foremost energy suppliers, and then share how their corporate emphasis on sustainability, how that affects its various stakeholders, how that permeates to its operating units, how that reflects its relationship with its investors, its customers, et cetera. Ian, all yours.
All right. Well, thanks, Ron. And thank you for having me, but more importantly, Sempra participate today. We certainly appreciate the invitation and look forward to the dialogue and the conversation. So let me take a step back, as you mentioned, and kind of give a sort of a hierarchical view of Sempra and who we are and what we do. So we are an energy infrastructure company. We are headquartered in San Diego, California, roughly 19,000 employees across all of our different operating companies, including corporate. So we have a very large presence. We are, if you look at Sempra, we're sort of broken into three vertical platforms, I'll say, right? Sempra California, and that is, as you described, our two California utilities. So you've got Southern California Gas Company up in the Los Angeles area, delivering more natural gas to customers than any other utility in the country. We've also got San Diego Gas and Electric, which is obviously down in the San Diego region, serving the customers in this service territory. And then you've got another vertical platform that we call Sempra Texas. And so a couple years ago now, we acquired Encore Electric. They're a pure transmission distribution company headquartered there in Dallas, providing transmission and distribution service to their customers. And then the third sort of platform, if you will, is what we call Sempra Infrastructure. And that is predominantly our Mexico operations. So we do have a significant presence in Mexico, including some renewable power generation in Mexico. And then we also have our LNG business, our liquefied natural gas business. And right now we have a large facility that does liquefaction in Cameron Parish, Louisiana. And so those we own the infrastructure, the gas comes in, we liquefy it, and it goes to markets across the world for delivery. So that's kind of a high level overview of who we are as a company. Now, to your question of sustainability, I do serve as our Director of Corporate Sustainability, and over the past 3 to 5 years, and I've been in this role now for about 4 years. So about the past 3 to 5 years, we've seen a real shift in the emphasis and focus around sustainability, right? And it's across all stakeholders, but increasingly so amongst the investor community. They're asking for companies to be more transparent around their risks and opportunities associated with sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, we really think of it under the lens of always acronyms in this world, right? But we talk about it under the lens of ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And we can go into a little bit more of those three down the road here in our conversation. But how companies perform under those elements, right? So your emissions, what are your emissions profiles? That's kind of the E space. How do you approach safety, and what's your record on safety? And the S space, along with diversity, equity, and inclusion in that area as well, right? And then governance, how is your board structured? What's the diversity makeup of your board, and a lot of other things in the government space. So those three particular areas are what we refer to as sustainability when we think about it from that lens. Now, taking a step back and combining both, 2020, this most recent year, really put into sharp focus, for us at least, the vital role of energy, right, as an energy infrastructure company. Critical energy infrastructure has and will continue to deliver the power needed for things like hospitals, right, medical research centers, manufacturing plants, to operate, and they've supported millions of people who have worked, studied, cared for their families from home. And that's the role that we see, and that's why we're so passionate about what we do. We also see that we think, personally, there will be more change in the energy space, the energy landscape, in the next 20 years than perhaps we've seen over the past 100 years. And that's why you hear a lot about this notion of the energy transition, right, that's taking place. As an
And is that more in terms of the source of energy, diverting away in some proportion away from fossil fuels to other alternative sources of energy?
I think that's a part of it, right? But
Okay.
the other key element to that is going to be, if you break up sort of developed versus developing countries across the world, right? You're seeing a need for energy to be delivered into places like Asia, and particularly in China, right? As they transition from coal. Now, they may not have, or other countries may not have, the capability to go from coal right to renewables. So that's where natural gas, and in particular the LNG space, right? Sure. Domestically produced U.S. natural gas being transported over to countries like throughout Asia, who can now wean themselves off of coal and fuel oil as well to natural gas as a stepping stone to perhaps the future, which could be increased renewables. We could also see an increased role for hydrogen, right? There's a lot of other elements and capabilities that can come into it. And that is the energy transition, absolutely. And why we think we're uniquely positioned is that we're an energy infrastructure company, right? We do have some generation assets, but few. Where we're going towards is more about owning, operating, and managing the infrastructure that enables that transition. And a prime example for that would be in Texas. More wind energy is produced in the state of Texas than any other state in the country. However, as you might imagine, renewables are oftentimes generated in areas that aren't in load centers, right? Downtown Dallas, downtown Houston may not have the capability to have large-scale wind production right in the middle of downtown, or large-scale solar. But so those are located outside. So you need the infrastructure to deliver that renewable energy into load centers like Dallas and Houston and others. And that's where Encore comes in. That's that infrastructure, the transmission and distribution that will allow additional future growth in renewables to meet the needs of customers in those load centers and outside.
Interesting. Got it. And so there's not a panacea tomorrow, but it's interesting how Sempra's got several tools in place, and then you can probably leverage your expertise in what you're dealing in terms of customer-facing direct activities in Southern California, and that probably gives you insights on how to manage and optimize your operations in your Encore and LNG businesses that are suppliers, in effect, to the SDG&Es of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And, every state is unique. Every state is different. California is always at the cutting edge. They're at the forefront of looking at how they can improve the world, right, and make things greener and more efficient and better and reduce emissions. And whether it's through the RPS, the renewable portfolio standards that were created years ago that many states adopted, that required a certain amount or percentage of power being delivered to customers to come from renewable sources, right? So that was that 60% by 2030, and SDG&E I think is currently around 35% of the power that they procure for their customer base comes from renewable sources. So there's ever increasing mandates, regulatory requirements, legislative requirements. In addition, California is they've sent a law to require net zero by 2045. So both San Diego Gas and Electric and SoCal Gas have committed to that as well, of course, because it's law. So we're moving in that direction. Now, where we differentiate and where we think we can bring a lot of value is really in something called the 3D framework. So we've set our own net zero goal as a company, right, by 2050. We also have interim targets. But we think through the 3D strategy, which is decarbonization, diversification, and digitalization, those 3Ds are going to enable not only our own operations to become increasingly lower emission and eventually net zero emissions, but it enables our customers to do the same, right? And so think about that. It's like the role of AI. What's the role of artificial intelligence in our future systems? Battery storage, what's the role there? Backcountry microgrid pilots that we're doing. So all these different advances that we're making as a company and that we're piloting and testing, carbon capture storage, they all have the capability to help us as a company lower our own emissions, which is ultimately what we want to do and we're committed to doing. And then also enable our customers to do the same. And that's how we think, and that's the role that we think as an energy infrastructure company that we can help play in enabling eventually the world, obviously our customer base, but through that elsewhere, lowering emissions wherever possible.
So it's interesting because every organization is only consuming more energy in a sense.
Yes.
It's not like the demand for energy is going down, but what Sempra's doing and its operating units are saying, okay, we're just going to work with you to figure out the best, most sustainable way to supply that energy, be it with liquefied natural gas, which is clearly better than coal today,
Yes.
be it with solar in 5 years, be it, and then you've got the transmission grid. So when you put in these huge wind farms in between, like I've driven from Dallas to Waco, there's a lot of empty land between Dallas and Waco where you can put in wind farms and no one's going to notice.
Yeah, exactly right.
And then you're going to deal. It's also interesting. I just want to make sure I get this right, because you mentioned, there's government regulations, and I bet there's almost 3 things going on. There is, on one hand, activities in Sacramento or, Austin, where you're based out of, what's being driven in the state. There's obviously a lot being driven out of DC. So you've got those government regulations that people think are the main drivers, but in listening to you and studying this a little bit, it doesn't really seem the case. I mean, everyone's aware of that, but at the same time, you've got it even more so. You don't want to have activist shareholders start screaming at your annual meeting saying, what are you doing about this? So you've got that push there. And then, knowing the Sempra management, I've studied, read about it, it's a very enlightened, proactive approach because, they're not kicking and screaming, well, we have to stay in the past. It's a very proactive approach. You've got the government mandates, you've got the shareholder mandates, simply providing more force for what Sempra management and other enlightened utilities are doing to go even faster. Is that a summary of those 3 key forces?
Absolutely. That's spot on. And, I think effective companies, and I'd like to think that we are certainly one of those, we work collaboratively with government, right? And with other stakeholders to continuously move the needle forward. And so it may be that there are requirements in place, but we also help shape some of that by working collaboratively with our state legislatures and our federal government, right? About what's possible, not only what's possible today, but more importantly, what's the dream of tomorrow? What's the possibility for tomorrow, and how do we get there? And that's what we do on a constant basis with those folks. And I think that's where, getting back to the original part of our discussion, that's where sustainability is coming in and becoming more focused, right? We're seeing it at the federal level. We're hearing that the SEC is going to be looking for companies to disclose more data and other information around their sustainability, the E, S, and G elements, right, of their sustainability. And we've been doing it for a long time. We'll be publishing our 14th, if I'm not mistaken, sustainability report later this year at the end of April. And it's ironic, in 14 years ago, when we published our first sustainability report, about 13 to 15% of S&P 500 companies were publishing sustainability reports, a very small number. Now, today, that's 95% of S&P 500 companies are publishing sustainability reports. Why? Because stakeholders, including investors, are saying, we want this information. You need to get us this information. And it's not just your emissions. I think what's interesting is COVID really shone a light on what companies are doing to ensure the safety of their employees, the safety of their contractors, the safety of their communities. And so that really put an emphasis on the S in ESG. And then, of course, the social justice issues we saw percolate over this country, and rightfully so, over the past couple of years, also shone a light on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not only what a company does internally and how those numbers stack up, but what are they doing to help advance those causes and those issues within the communities they serve. And so all of that information is now typically captured through, we have a data collection process across all of our operating companies, and we try to publish all of that data in some way, shape, or form in our sustainability report that we put out once a year.
So let me try and drill down a little bit for the relevance that they may offer to entities listening to this in Southern California, Texas, or throughout the country. So how does that strategy, from your standpoint in Sempra, how does that percolate within your operating units? And what are some of the ways that they try and not only reflect that in their own operations at Southern California Gas and San Diego Gas and Electric, but how does that also get transmitted into the business communities in which they operate?
Yeah. So I would say this. So first of all, we work very closely. We meaning I'm at corporate, so I'm at Sempra, right? But we work very closely we have an established what we call our sustainability steering committee, which is an officer level or senior executive level representation from across all of our operating companies are involved in that. So when we're talking about our sustainability strategy at the Sempra level, we're obviously working with our operating companies because they now have to then go out and work to deploy the strategies that will allow us to meet those targets and those goals, right? So we work collaboratively and collectively to do so. Then those operating companies look, and obviously this is fairly common sense, but it's becoming increasingly more focused now, but taking a look at the operational risks and opportunities is good for the bottom line, and ultimately it's good for our communities, right? And I'll use an example. If you look at San Diego Gas and Electric, obviously we live in a state in California where wildfires have become a significant threat, right? And it's very, very clearly illustrated with climate change. It's right there, right? We're seeing it constantly now, where fire season used to be at one time a year for a few months. It's 12 months a year now in California. San Diego Gas and Electric, quite a few years back now, established that's a risk to the company. It's a risk to our shareholders. It's a risk to our communities and our customers. And we deployed our fire safety plan, and we're now on, I think, iteration 4 of that. We began hardening our system in the backcountry. We began putting in safety mechanisms to support the communities when there were fires. We developed a well-articulated, well-thought-off shutoff plan so that we were shutting off power only at a granular level, not customer-wide, but looking at those circuits where that might be impacted due to high winds or humidity or other conditions that could be, very troublesome when it comes to fire starting. So we started looking at that, and we deployed that entire program, and we've been very successful in that. That helps us at the operational level, right? Because we haven't had to deal with that since then, knock on wood. But, that's what we want to do across all of our operating companies, is identify those risks and opportunities and put into place plans that address those. That is sustainability. That goes to the core of who we are as a company, right? Our vision is to deliver energy with purpose. And that word purpose is critically important to us as a company and to all of our employees, our 19,000 strong. And we're doing it with that in mind to protect our employees, our contractors, and our customers.
And as my daughters haven't convinced me yet to move to San Diego where they can play volleyball on the beach just yet. Though when we were down there last Christmas, they were looking at houses and tried to get me to make an offer, but that might be a year or two away.
Well, I'm biased. I'm born and raised here, but San Diego's a great place to grow up.
I know my college roommate's in Carlsbad, so we might just be a couple of years away. But I think when you talk about sustainability, it's having, in a sense, that sustained energy flow that isn't disrupted, which is so critically important for organizations. As you said, God forbid in a hurricane, or we have it here in New York, bad snowstorms. I mean, literally, power is life and death in these situations. And, having a sustainability orientation to provide sustained power, to figure out my choice of words correctly, is critically important. And then also making sure that sustained, consistent power can be delivered while still meeting sustainability objectives, is, I think, that's what Sempra does.
Absolutely. I mean, at the forefront for us, it's safety. Safety is number one for us, for the safety of our employees and our contractors and our customers. But number two, that reliability element is key, right? We as an energy infrastructure, we're delivering the power that people need, that they rely on a daily basis to live their lives, right? And that reliability element has to be critical. It has to be a key element of everything we're doing, while also looking to the future on how we make things greener in that energy mix and lower emissions ultimately. But we have to ensure reliability in the process as well.
And the good thing is, individuals listening to this have no doubt that there's a whole outreach team. If you live in San Diego, where San Diego Gas and Electric has resources available where they can share with organizations based in San Diego, what are your best practices at San Diego Gas and Electric? If you're up there in LA, what Southern California Gas is doing. And even if you're in Texas or Louisiana, where they're not so much directly customer facing, they can still provide resources to organizations just because they can tap into the collective Sempra mindset and expertise.
Absolutely. And one of the quickest, easiest ways to go is obviously just go to sempra.com. And from there, there's shoots off to our various operating companies as well. So you can get into that granular level there.
Well, this is fascinating. Well, I'm going to look forward to interviewing a year to see what are the new things that Sempra is doing. As we roll out these sustainability programs, it's so helpful to understand the commitment. Anyone who wants to get that more detail, you go to sempra.com, you can go to angelbait.com, and then you could tap into the resources that they offer in other organizations. I think it's great. And when I think about this, again, I just am so impressed with Sempra. And, at least my own independent takeaway is when people think, well, this requires so much emphasis from DC or the federal to make this happen. I think it's amazing because when you look at companies like Sempra, they're ahead of the curve, and you're not waiting for anything to come out of DC. I mean, I can tell you during different administrations where you didn't have this $1 trillion infrastructure bill with all these clean energy initiatives and all that, Sempra has been doing this, as you said, for 10, 20 years, anticipating the problems. You can probably even go back to when I was growing up, like the oil shocks of the late 70s and 80s, and that provides a tremendous deterrent and instability and unsustainable production where you've got high volatility. And you look at some of the stories in probably 10 years ago in California with electricity pricing and volatility that also goes against the strategy of Sempra providing consistent, sustained, reliable, and safe power is really, all those things. So for anyone watching, I'm not a paid endorser, but I can tell you when we look at this, it's I think for my kid who's going to live in San Diego next to Ian in a couple of years, when she's out there, it's going to be very satisfying because you'll get a sense that it's great that DC is full speed ahead with this and trying to do it the right way. And it's great that Sacramento's doing this. But, I don't know if they're pushing Sempra or if Sempra's dragging them forward with them. It's probably, and in terms of what's happening and who's really, who's pushing the cart and who's driving it. But it's good to know all three are clearly aligned. And in the end, it's all in sync with, again, management expertise. And the final thing, I have to believe it's a heck of a lot easier hiring all the new generation of talent who wants to be at an organization that is green friendly. And plus, with so much of this is now based on software and managing the grid and distributing energy, it's got to be a big boost, not only Sempra's bottom line to shareholders, but for your hiring. And I think that's, maybe you could comment on that as a final takeaway, that if you want to get the best of breed of talent, everyone knows there's a huge job shortage. Unemployment is so low everywhere. There's so many opportunities. I think another competitive edge to organizations in adopting sustainability is that's the best way to hire and retain people, because you want to be associated with an organization that is doing all the right things financially, ESG-wise, et cetera.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And in fact, I was chuckling while you were saying all of that, because we could spend another half hour just talking about sustainability and why a company needs to take it seriously, just from the point of attracting and retaining talent. And when you look at an energy company, obviously we need a very highly skilled workforce. And so when we get those highly skilled individuals in here, we want to make sure we keep them. And the number one factor we're seeing amongst the millennial and Gen Z, groups are the commitments companies are making and the goals that they're establishing and the reporting that they're doing around sustainability. They want to work for a morally and ethically robust company, somebody who takes these things seriously and doesn't just talk the talk, but walks the walk, right?
Yep.
And that's critically important to us. I was just speaking at a class at a local university not long ago, and I asked the class to raise their hand. What's the number one thing for you in looking for an employment to work for a company you can believe in and that you feel positive about? Every single hand went up. They go out, they actually read our sustainability reports to decide if they want to even interview with us. So it's critically important to them, and that means it's critically important to us.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ian. I'll look forward to seeing you in Southern California when my daughter is playing beach volleyball all the time, and I have left, we had a foot of snow in New York, and the San Diego weather, as my friend down there in Carlsbad sent me pictures, look better and better.
Yeah, no snow here, so come on out. And if you're ever out here, let me know. I'd love to, we'll grab a coffee or something. And yeah, I look forward to having another conversation, a follow-up conversation with you later to talk a little bit more about what we continue to do.
Great. Thanks so much, Ian. Have a good night now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ron. You too.